information of these two issues being really key to slowing down their progress. We believe that we can address these problems, and we'll talk more about that through our processor and system level differentiation. And from the ML expertise perspective, bringing out ML use cases and biomedical focused enablement models. If we can unblock that particular area around time and cost to train and ML expertise, it unlocks the whole flow, and that solution chain will flow better. If you look at clinical healthcare, you actually see a very similar picture. Patient again, it starts with the patient. It's about fast diagnosis, quality care. Healthcare providers are trying to help with new AI software and new AI assist approaches. They have an issue though around, again, a trust problem, practitioner trust. So there's an example that I can talk about. I was speaking with the CIO of a radiology outpatient business who rolled out new AI software for 3D mammograms with the expectation that it would reduce the diagnosis time by about 20%. Instead, he found that his diagnosis time went up. And when he looked into it, he found out that the radiologists were still doing it the old-fashioned way, but then cross-checking their results with what they saw from the AI software. So there was this trust issue where it was taking some time for the radiologists to accept what was coming out from the AI software. So in order to really combat that, AI software providers, again, need higher AI quality. Higher AI quality means more advanced machine intelligence models and more data. That results in this, again, this issue with time, cost to train as a problem, and the level of ML expertise required to implement a higher AI quality. And again, Graphcore is trying to help through our differentiation with our processor and the system level scale level advantages, as well as these clinically targeted enablement strategies for biomedical. So let's look a little more closely at these two problem areas. So time and cost to train, again, is due to more advanced machine learning models, more data. There's increasing complexity in the knowledge graphs that the AI teams are attempting to work with. There's more churn in the data than the AI teams can imagine. For example, with this one manager of a large team of data scientists, they had expected to be retraining their BERT model once a quarter. Instead, because there's so much trained in their data, in the kind of clinical data set they had, they found they were training BERT once a month. So their training costs had gone up by a factor of 3. So being able to address that by reducing the time to train and reducing the training costs would have a big impact on their bottom line. We're also finding issues with very locked into specific GPU availability in the cloud service providers that they work with, and they're really looking for an alternative processing architecture to help solve their time to train problem. So the way that Graphcore can help here is with a differentiated IPU, this intelligence processing unit that is developed from the ground up for these kinds of AI processing workloads. We have demonstrably better benchmarks on some key workloads that I'll talk more about, specifically transformer-based models and graph neural networks. The use of graph neural networks is quite nascent in this space, but there's a lot of interest because so much of what these AI teams are working with is graph-shaped. They can be working with proteins that are captured in the shape of graphs. They can be working with clinical data sets that are managed through some knowledge graphs. So there's a number of different problems across those use cases I mentioned where you're dealing with more complicated graph-shaped data. We're rolling out a cloud service with a partner which will provide both public and private cloud support. So that will give them an alternative to their conventional cloud service provider plus GPU, where they can instead move towards our CSP partner plus IPU. And being able to provide a very good private public hybrid cloud experience to replace what they're doing with the usual AWS and Azure is really key to helping these different AI teams. So more efficient processing, targeted biomedical initiatives and incentives equals significant cost savings in terms of training, and this is really key. And then there's a shortage of ML expertise. It's a very competitive AI startup environment. AI resources are being stolen right and left from these different startups and different AI teams, which means that there are more use cases and more experiments that need to be done that can possibly be done with the resources that they have. We're also seeing and hearing about a lack of familiarity with these more advanced graph neural networks and knowledge graphs and how we process them. So the way that Graphcore can help is through really targeted, collaborative engagements where we work with expert customers on key foundation models that will enable the rest of the market in those same use cases. We've engaged in some ML consulting, very specific sort of light touch ML consulting where we leverage our significant ML expertise to help more junior ML teams in these computational drug discovery startups. Working on training material for things like graph neural networks and graph processing and knowledge graphs to help. One of the pieces of feedback that I got from a manager of a large team of data scientists is he has a lot of data scientists, but they really don't know much about knowledge graphs and graph neural networks, and if they can come in and do some training, that would really help a lot. So we can do things to make these more advanced concepts more approachable, but also, as I mentioned before, roll out foundation ML models where the ML resources just need to take these models that are already pre-trained, fine-tune them, and use them for their own downstream tasks and their own kinds of data. So the three areas, there's computational drug discovery, patient data processing, and analytics for genomics. These are the three key areas that we've been focused on, where we see a very common ML landscape that involves a lot of use of autoencoders, historically sort of RNN, LSTM-based, variational autoencoders, usually something generative where they're trying to generate new kinds of data from the autoencoder. Seeing a lot of use of transformers like BERT, which you've heard about probably for natural language processing, but BERT's being applied to protein sequences, where it's being used to encode protein sequence and sequences of genomes to encode it into embedding space for different kinds of tests. Knowledge graphs, really important across a number of use cases spanning computational drug discovery up to clinical healthcare. Knowledge graphs require knowledge graph embedding models to move that high-dimensional data into low-dimensional embedding space, and as it happens, graph neural networks are really well-suited for that. Just to sort of underpin what I was talking about, the transformers everywhere, and this just talks about how even with vision processing, we're seeing the use of transformers in the form of vision transformers to replace more conventional convolutional neural networks like ResNet and so on. Increasing use of graph neural networks. This is from a paper that shows how over time we're seeing much more investigation into graph neural networks, and the use of GNN for graph processing will become very prevalent across healthcare. But like I said, it's very nascent, and folks are struggling to actually figure out how to use it. So this is where we're bringing expertise to bear in easy to reuse graph neural network models. This just illustrates the span of knowledge graphs from clinical applications for, say, drug recommendations, describe drug-drug interactions, to multi-omic applications. So knowledge graphs are becoming very prevalent, and to make use of them, you need knowledge graph embedding models, and for that, graph neural networks work really well, but there's an ML expertise barrier of entry that we're helping people with. Just to talk a little bit quickly about the processor, what Graphcore has brought to market is the IPU. The best way to think about it is the GPU is kind of massively parallel SIMD, same instruction, multiple data, so it's about vector processing, really big bulk vectors, and that's where GPUs are efficient. What's different about the IPU is it's a massively parallel NIMD engine. So this is 1,500 approximately independent processors, which makes it really good for very fine convolutions, sparse graph processing, in these kinds of fine-grained processing approaches. Very different from the GPU, and it's enabling much better benchmarks and faster time to train on those workloads that I just described. The IPU comes delivered in the Bow IPU machine, the Boat 2000, has 4 IPUs. It's a rack, machine intelligence processing plane goes into a rack, and then that's stacked in a rack upwards of 16 of these Boat 2000s in a rack, and then you can deploy that across thousands of IPUs in the right kinds of data centers. So the IPUs of a cloud, public cloud, private cloud processing for AI teams, training and running inference on these ML models for healthcare. That's it for me. I'm going to hand it off to my partner here. If you have any questions, I'm going to be here in the booth. Please feel free to come